This has been a totally fun show and weekend for me. My first time reporting from Capital Audio Fest. It's a very, very nice size show, quite a bit smaller than Expona, but much more manageable and much more interesting with a greater diversity of exhibitors than the Long Beach show in California. I think there's a lot of great sound here. If some people report that they didn't like the sound or they didn't like the sound in a lot of rooms, I think they're just being fussy or they're projecting their own personal sonic preferences, because I think there's a lot of great sound. I personally found a couple of things I didn't care for, but by and large, I think the sound from these systems these days, from these dealers, these distributors, not everything is everybody's cup of tea, but I think overall the sound quality is very, very good and very convincing. It has actually been interesting to speak with friends and see which rooms they liked and to compare notes, because don't ever forget this is an incredibly subjective hobby. Rooms that I did not care for were loved by friends of mine and vice versa. I want to mention some rooms I saw yesterday that I liked very much. Jeff Catalano, High Water Sound, had Cesaro Wagner with TW Acoustic Electronics and TW Acoustic Turntable. Jeff always gets great sound, and this show is no exception. Alma, Fabio and Alex of Alma Music and Sound had 4 rooms. I spent most of my time in their biggest room, which featured Bonichi, Nagra, and MSB. Those Bonichi speakers, they're not very big, but they're very well designed, very thoughtful and sophisticated, and they make a huge sound given their surprisingly small profile. Alex and Fabio had them in a very big room. I thought that was a great sounding room. Mike Powell, I visited Mike and I was curious to hear his Fisher & Fisher speakers. Completely unfamiliar system, of course, but I actually thought the speakers sounded very good, especially in the upper bass to mid-range, convincing and very full and very powerful. I thought they were good. Good job, Mike, finding those. MC Audio Tech. This is a company, the designer for which I interviewed several years ago at the Long Beach show, Paul Paddock. Paul Paddock is the fellow that invented that twin tube driver system where you have, it looks like 2 little rolls of paper, like a toilet paper tubes together. That's the driver system. But it actually sounds very, very good. And Paul is the inventor of that driver system. I'm always sympathetic to unconventional loudspeaker drivers. And his early iteration of that driver is populating the AudioNEC line of loudspeakers. They use his original version of that driver. He has partnered with Mark Conti and formed MC Audio Tech, and now he has a new version of that driver. It was debuted a few years ago. It looked like a phased array radar, and some people didn't like that form factor. I actually thought it sounded great. Friends of mine that at the time didn't necessarily care for it as much as I did, but I liked it then. I like their reformulation of the same system now into a much more conventional looking box speaker, which again is pretty clever. I think the woofer is kind of a transmission line design. The tubular drivers are now more hidden in the top of a conventional tower floor stand or speaker box. And I think it's still kind of semi-dipole because the driver box is open to both sides. So it's kind of ported on both sides. And they're basically trying to figure out how to package that amazing driver in a form factor that's palatable for people in domestic living situations. Whatever they do, I think the thing sounds great, and this was no exception. And this is the first time I've seen their form factor of a basically conventional wood box floor standing speaker versus the phased array radar on top of a square box containing the woofer. Von Schweikert Audio. Von Schweikert Audio partnered with Gary Leeds and Lucas Fickus and Fred Ainsley of Lampezator. And they always get a great sounding room. So this year it was the Von Schweikert VR55 Mark II, driven by Gary's Westminster Labs REI amplifiers. Those amplifiers seem to do a good job no matter what they're partnered with. I have to say, this year was no exception. The system sounded great. I've personally heard those amplifiers on a friend's speakers at length, and that friend actually wound up buying them. they sound great. You should try them. The front end this year was Lucas Ficus's new Poseidon debuting here. The Poseidon is positioned between my Baltic 4 and the Horizon, I think about half the price of the Horizon. It'll be interesting to see how people find the Poseidon versus the Horizon looking up versus the Pacific 2, which is basically the same price as the Poseidon is now, I believe. Great sounding room, and it was a very large, welcoming room. I think Gary had very good luck with people enjoying sitting and listening in that room. Bending Wave, Elliot had a very big room, one of the best dimensioned rooms I've seen at an audio show, and he had he rented a curtain for the three sides, the front left side, front right side, and the front wall. It was a great sounding room. A line of speakers I like a lot, Oliver Goebel's Divin line. I had heard the Divin Majestic 2 times at length in Munich, and in a alternative universe, I might actually have gotten Divin Majestics if I was more of a box speaker person. But I love that speaker, especially because it's quite sensitive. The Divin Majestic is actually 96 dB sensitive, so I would drive that thing with like an Apslar SET and live happily forever. This show, Elliot was showing the smallest of the 3 Divin speakers, the Marquis, driven by a line of electronics I was unfamiliar with, Riviera from Italy, never saw it before. The amplifier is a hybrid, I think about 100 watts, and of course Elliot's systems are always fronted with his full line of WADACs. The amplifiers needed to break in. On Thursday night, I actually found it a little bit bright, but by Saturday afternoon, it was a completely different sounding system. I sat there for a long time loving it. I just like the Divin box speakers, and Elliot played for me a Solar Energy, which I play all the time at home, so I know it very, very well, and the system sounded great. I went back to MBL, I went back to the Viva, Amadeo's Viva room, and I went back to Classic Audio, confirming my impressions from the first report that I like those systems. MBL is the best I've ever heard it. I spoke to Amadeo, the designer at Viva Audio. I said, you know, I've loved your Viva Aurora Mono, which is 1 845 output tube, for years. I'd really like you to make for me a parallel single-ended triode using 3 845s. Amadeo looked at me very disappointingly, shaking his head. No, you just need to get more sensitive speakers. Songer. I have friends that prefer the S1. I prefer the S2. It's very interesting how people come down on preferring one or the other of those Songer speakers. I like the openness of the S2, and a close friend of mine has listened extensively as well, and he prefers the S1, so it's kind of interesting how polarizing the S1 versus the S2 is. This year, powered by Trafomatic, which I thought sounded very good. An interesting loudspeaker system, the Arion Apollo. 4-tower systems always speak my loudspeaker love language, especially if they're planars. And I went into this room, it was a giant room, pretty excited. I think it sounded very good, but then I was told that it's DSP based. So, you know, I'm not a real digital DSP type person, but I definitely like the form factor of the 4 towers, planar. I mean, it's totally my thing. A vertical array of ribbons, a separate tower of woofers. But I'm a little skeptical about the DSP stuff, so I'm not sure of the ultimate sound. But they played a London Grammar, which I know quite well, and I thought it sounded very, very good. Just not personally the fan of the DSP stuff. I went back to Doug White's room, The Voice That Is. Tidal is not particularly my cup of tea, but as always, Doug gets great sounding rooms. So that room sounded great. I still like Val and Matt and Harry's Acora Audio Research VPI room. One clunker for me personally, for solid state amplification, depending on the application, meaning the related speakers, I generally like Dartseal and I generally like Griffin. For a difficult to drive speaker, I would probably choose Griffin. For a less difficult to drive speaker, I like the Dartseal. But Dartseal had 2 rooms. The second of the rooms was Dartseal driving Avantgarde Duo. That sound just does not work for me. For whatever reason, I have never once cared for solid state driving Avant-Garde. I know Avant-Garde now has the iTron solid state electronics option, but that, whatever that is doing, it's completely geared and designed to work with those speakers, so that may be probably as a separate category. But just conventional solid state and Avant-Garde has just never worked for me, and I found the Dart Seal on the Duos just relentlessly bright. So that was just room I did not care for, which is ironic because normally Dart Seal is the standard recommendation of mine for solid state amplification. I would like to have seen more analog. Many rooms are digital only these days. I know it's a hassle to bring a turntable, let alone a tape deck, but I personally just much prefer hearing and seeing analog in these rooms, and for my taste, too many rooms were just digital only. That's the wrap up. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and if you have any questions about anything I've said, or if you have any questions about any of the rooms I've discussed, please don't hesitate to write those questions to me in the comments section. I read all comments and I respond carefully and thoughtfully to all comments.